She always believed family was everything. She poured her heart, time, and trust into them. But one day, the people she loved the most turned against her. The betrayal was so deep, so unexpected, that it shattered her world completely. What she went through next will break your heart and open your eyes to the truth about trust, love, and family. Visual suggestion. Close-up of a woman's tear-streaked face, shaking hands, empty rooms, broken letters or documents. Subtle dramatic music. Sadia had always believed in the power of family. Growing up in a modest neighborhood of Karachi, she had learned early on that life was unpredictable, cruel even, but the bond of family was meant to be a sanctuary. Her parents had raised her with love, guiding her through every obstacle, always insisting that family was the only thing in life worth trusting. As she grew older, Sadia carried that lesson with her. When she finished college, she started working at a small boutique, earning just enough to support herself and occasionally help her parents. She lived simply, wore simple clothes, and never indulged in luxuries. She believed that wealth and status were fleeting, but family and loyalty were eternal. Sadia's family, by appearances, was close-knit. Her father, a retired schoolteacher, spent his days at home reading newspapers and sipping tea on the veranda. Her mother, a soft-spoken woman with tired eyes, worked tirelessly to maintain the house and care for her children. Then there were her siblings, her elder brother, Adil, who had always been charming but ambitious, and her younger sister, Maywish, who depended on Sadia emotionally and financially in subtle ways. On the outside, they seemed perfect. They laughed at family dinners, celebrated birthdays, and occasionally exchanged gifts. But Sadia's heart was always the most giving, the most trusting. She never suspected that her generosity and unconditional love could be used against her. Everything seemed normal until Sadia met Imran. He was her colleague at the boutique, quiet, respectful, and attentive. Over time, their friendship blossomed into something deeper. Sadia, for the first time in her life, felt she had someone who truly understood her, not just her, but her family, her fears, her dreams. Imran had a gentle way of listening, a calmness that reassured her when life became overwhelming. One evening, while having tea at home, Sadia mentioned Imran to her family. "I met someone at work," she said shyly. "He's different. Kind. I think he might be the one." Her parents smiled, though their smiles carried a trace of caution. "We trust your judgment, Beta," her mother said. "But remember, always introduce him properly. Family comes first." Sadia nodded, her heart swelling with hope. She introduced Imran to her parents, who seemed to like him, and even to her siblings. Maywish gushed over how charming he was, while Adil nodded approvingly, though his eyes carried something Sadia couldn't yet read. For a while, life was beautiful. Sadia and Imran's relationship grew, and she found herself imagining a future filled with love and stability. She confided in her family about her hopes, the wedding, the home, maybe even children someday. Every suggestion she made was met with encouragement, and she believed that she had their full support. But trust, Sadia would soon learn, could be a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. It began subtly. Her father, who had always seemed protective, started questioning small things. "Are you sure he's serious?" he asked one day, glancing at her over his reading glasses. Sometimes people show kindness only to get something in return. Her mother, however, continued to reassure her. "Don't overthink, Beta. You've always been careful. Trust your heart." Sadia took her mother's advice. After all, who knew her heart better than she did? And yet, the first cracks appeared not from Imran, but from the people she had always loved, the ones she thought would never hurt her. It was Adil who first crossed the line. Adil had always been ambitious, but recently his ambitions had turned desperate. He had started borrowing money from friends, avoiding bills, and subtly hinting that he needed assistance. One evening, he approached Sadia quietly while she was organizing files at the boutique. "Can you help me with something?" he asked, almost casually. "I'm short this month, just a little loan. I'll return it next week." Sadia hesitated. She knew Adil had a habit of borrowing and forgetting to pay back, but he was her brother. "How much?" she asked cautiously. "Not much," he said, shrugging. "Just enough to cover some urgent matters." Sadia reached into her purse and handed him the cash without hesitation. She trusted her brother, after all. He was family. What could go wrong? But things escalated. The loans became more frequent, the requests more urgent. Sometimes, she found herself emptying her savings to cover his debts, telling herself that helping family was more important than her own financial security. Meanwhile, Maywish started hinting at her own needs, suggesting subtle ways Sadia could assist with her schooling, clothing, or even personal expenses. Sadia, ever trusting, gave freely, believing she was helping her siblings navigate life. She never considered that this trust might be exploited. Then came the day she discovered Imran's proposal waiting in her mailbox. He wanted to marry her. Sadia's heart leaped. She ran home to share the news. "Mom, Dad, I'm getting married," she cried, holding the letter like a treasure. Her parents hugged her, their smiles warm. "We're happy for you, Beta," her mother said. "But remember, marriage is about more than love. It's about trust, respect, and family too." Sadia nodded eagerly, imagining a future where everyone, her family and Imran, lived in harmony. She began planning the wedding with excitement. Invitations were printed, dresses were chosen, and venues were booked. She wanted everything perfect, hoping to create memories that would last a lifetime. But the betrayal was closer than she imagined. Adil, who had borrowed from her countless times, saw an opportunity. He approached her one evening with a plan. "Why don't you let me handle the wedding finances?" he suggested casually. "You've been stressed, and I can manage things better. Just trust me." Sadia hesitated but agreed. He promised to manage everything, to pay vendors, and to ensure the wedding was flawless. After all, he was her brother. She trusted him. Over the next few weeks, things began to unravel. Payments were missed. Vendors called to ask for money. Dresses weren't delivered. The caterer threatened to cancel. Sadia, in panic, tried contacting Adil, but he avoided her calls and messages. Then the worst happened. One morning, she received a letter from the bank. Her personal savings account had been emptied. Adil had taken loans in her name, forged signatures, and left her financially ruined. The money she had painstakingly saved for years, the money she had trusted her family to respect, was gone. Sadia felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. The people she loved, the people she had trusted with her life, had destroyed her security, her dignity, and her sense of safety. In her darkest hour, Sadia turned to Imran. She told him everything: the loans, the missing money, the betrayal. Imran, heartbroken, held her hands and said, "Sadia, you trusted the wrong people. But I'm here. We'll face this together." But even love couldn't shield her from the next blow. As she began to rebuild, she discovered that Adil and Maywish had been conspiring against her in more ways than one. Personal letters, private conversations, even family secrets, everything was being used to manipulate her, to control her, to keep her dependent. She realized that the betrayal was not a mistake, it was calculated. Every day, Sadia felt the weight of deception. Every glance, every whisper from her so-called family reminded her of the trust she had misplaced. She had been loyal, generous, and loving, and in return, she had been exploited and humiliated. Yet, in the midst of this despair, a tiny spark remained. Sadia realized that if she gave up completely, she would let the betrayal define her. She decided that she would confront her family, not with anger, but with strength. She would reclaim her life, her dignity, and her future. The journey, she knew, would be painful. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and trust once broken is never easily restored. But Sadia had one thing her family could never take: her resilience. And though her world had been shattered, she was determined to rise from the ruins, stronger and wiser. Little did she know that the true betrayal, the one that would shake her to her very core, was yet to come. The betrayal runs deeper. The days after the revelation were the darkest of Sadia's life. Her once warm and comforting home had become a battlefield of lies, manipulation, and silent threats. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of betrayal. Her heart, which had always believed in the goodness of her family, now throbbed with confusion and pain. She felt lost in a world she once thought she fully understood. Her mother, the one she had trusted implicitly, seemed torn. "Sadia, I didn't know this would happen," she murmured one evening, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought a deal. I thought Maywish. They would never do such a thing." Sadia could only shake her head, a mixture of hurt and disbelief etched on her face. "You didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mom, you were with them every step of the way. How could you not see it coming?" Her mother's silence said more than words ever could. Sadia realized that even if her mother hadn't actively participated, she had turned a blind eye, choosing comfort over truth. The betrayal didn't stop at money. Sadia soon discovered that her family had been spreading rumors about her in the neighborhood. They portrayed her as reckless, careless, and irresponsible, a woman who had allowed herself to be deceived by a lover, a woman who had squandered family honor and wealth. The whispers traveled quickly, and the judgmental eyes of distant relatives and neighbors made her feel suffocated. Even in the workplace, subtle changes were noticeable. Clients and colleagues, who once respected her, started doubting her judgment. Sadia felt the weight of shame pressing down on her, and every friendly conversation seemed to carry a hidden accusation. She had trusted her family to protect her name, but instead, they had destroyed it. One afternoon, as Sadia sat in her small, cluttered apartment staring at the pile of unpaid bills, her phone rang. It was Imran. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, sensing her despair even over the phone. "I don't know anymore," Sadia confessed. Everyone, has turned against me. My own family, they've ruined everything I worked for." "Listen," Imran said firmly, "you are not alone. They may have betrayed you, but you still have me. And we will find a way out of this together. Trust me." Sadia felt a small spark of hope, but it was fragile. She knew that rebuilding her life would not be easy. Her savings were gone. Her reputation was tarnished. And the people she had loved and trusted the most had become her enemies. She decided to confront her siblings first. One evening, she called Adil to her apartment. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Adil arrived, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Sadia, what's this about?" he asked casually, trying to appear nonchalant. "You know what this is about," Sadia said sharply. "You've taken my savings, ruined my wedding plans, and lied to me repeatedly. I trusted you, Adil, and you destroyed everything." Adil's smile faltered. "Sadia, it wasn't like that. I needed the money. You'll understand someday." "No," Sadia said firmly. "I don't think I ever will. You used my trust, manipulated me, and now you've ruined my life. And I can't let you do it anymore." He tried to defend himself, to twist the situation, but Sadia would not be swayed. She realized that this confrontation was not about reconciliation, it was about reclaiming her power, even if her family refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Next, she faced Maywish. Her younger sister had always appeared fragile and dependent, but Sadia now saw the cunning behind the facade. "You weren't struggling," Sadia said quietly, holding back tears. "You were using me. Everything you needed, you manipulated me into giving." Maywish's eyes widened, and for a moment, Sadia thought she might show remorse. But instead, her sister laughed softly, almost cruelly. "Sadia, you've always been naive. That's why everyone takes advantage of you." Sadia turned away, her heart heavy. The woman who had once been her confidant, her friend, was now another agent of betrayal. She felt the sharp sting of loss, not just of money, not just of plans, but of trust, of love, of the very essence of what family was supposed to be. It was during these weeks of despair that Sadia truly felt the power of loneliness. Friends who had once been distant became even more distant, afraid to associate with her scandal-ridden family. Even Imran, her steadfast support, could not entirely shield her from the relentless whispers of gossip. Yet, amidst the chaos, a transformation began. Sadia realized that she could not change her family, nor could she undo the betrayal. But she could control how she responded. The first step was survival. She found a small, modest apartment away from her old neighborhood. It was cramped, barely furnished, but it was hers. No one could interfere here, no one could manipulate her. Sadia also returned to work, though her confidence had been shaken. At first, every customer interaction felt like a test, every phone call a potential insult. But gradually, she began to rebuild. She focused on the boutique, on the clothes, on the relationships she could still nurture. Imran visited frequently, offering both emotional and practical support, helping her manage her finances and plan for the future. The turning point came when Sadia discovered a hidden talent: writing. She began journaling her experiences, pouring every ounce of pain, betrayal, and hope into words. Her journal became a sanctuary, a way to process her emotions and begin healing. She even started sharing some of her stories online under a pseudonym. The response was overwhelming. Strangers reached out with messages of empathy, support, and advice. For the first time, Sadia realized that while her family had failed her, the world still held people who could see her worth, who valued her for who she truly was. Despite this growing resilience, Sadia knew that confronting her family publicly might still be necessary. The debts they had incurred in her name, the lies spread about her character, and the emotional damage could not simply be ignored. She sought legal advice and discovered that she had a case against a deal for fraud. Though the process would be long and grueling, she felt a sense of empowerment just by taking action. Meanwhile, her relationship with Imran deepened. He became not just a lover, but a partner in rebuilding her life. He encouraged her to pursue her passions, to reclaim her confidence, and to trust cautiously but wisely. Sadia learned to set boundaries, to protect herself emotionally and financially, and to value her own judgment above all else. The story of her betrayal slowly became one of resilience. Every small victory, a cleared debt, a supportive message, a successful day at work, reminded Sadia that she was not defined by her family's cruelty. She was learning to trust herself, to honor her instincts, and to prioritize her well-being. And yet, the pain lingered. Nights were the hardest when memories of her family's smiles, her mother's reassurances, and her siblings' laughter collided with the reality of their betrayal. Sadia often lay awake, tears streaming silently, wondering why those she loved most had chosen deception over love. But with time, a shift occurred. Sadia's perspective changed. She realized that trust was not inherently dangerous, it was selective. She began to build a circle of people who valued integrity, honesty, and mutual respect. Friends who genuinely cared, mentors who guided her, and Imran, whose unwavering support reminded her that love could still be pure. Sadia had not yet fully healed, but she had taken the first crucial steps. She had faced her family's betrayal head-on, reclaimed her personal space, and discovered inner strength she never knew existed. She had learned the bitter truth: family is not always synonymous with loyalty. But she had also learned something more profound: self-worth, resilience, and courage are forged in the fires of adversity. The journey ahead was still uncertain. Legal battles, emotional recovery, and rebuilding trust in the world would test her further. But Sadia was no longer the naive, trusting woman she once was. She had faced betrayal, stared it in the eyes, and refused to be destroyed. And though the scars would remain, they would serve as a reminder of her strength, not her weakness. Little did she know that the final chapter of the story, the ultimate test of her courage, intelligence, and heart, was yet to come. But for now, she had survived the storm. She had survived the cruelty of those she once called family, and in that survival, she had discovered the first glimmers of true freedom. Sadia's mornings had begun to feel lighter. Not because the weight of her betrayal had disappeared, far from it, but because she had started to reclaim control over her life. Each day, she reminded herself she had survived the worst that her own family could throw at her. Now, it was time to fight back, not with vengeance, but with justice, dignity, and clarity. The first step was confronting the reality she had long avoided, the financial ruin caused by her brother, Adil. With Imran's guidance, she sought legal advice. The lawyer's office was cold and impersonal, but Sadia didn't flinch. She recounted the events in painstaking detail, showing bank statements, letters, and evidence of loans taken in her name without consent. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes, leaned back in his chair. "Miss Sadia, this is a clear case of fraud. Your brother has misused your identity, and you have every right to file charges. The process will be slow, but justice is possible." Sadia felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in months, the fear and shame that had haunted her seemed less overwhelming. "Then let's start," she said firmly. "I won't let this go unpunished." The legal process was grueling. Court dates, endless paperwork, and tense meetings became part of Sadia's routine. Adil, of course, tried to deny everything, spinning stories about misunderstandings and false accusations. Maywish, who had initially hidden behind her tears and sweet smiles, began to avoid confrontation entirely, realizing that Sadia was no longer the naive sister she had once exploited. Despite the stress, Sadia found strength in her resolve. She reminded herself every day that this battle wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming her dignity, her name, and her life. And she wasn't alone. Imran stood by her side at every step, offering not just love but strategy, perspective, and unwavering support. Socially, the battle was more complex. Word of her family's betrayal had spread, and while some neighbors whispered judgmentally, others approached her with empathy. Sadia learned who her true allies were. Women who had experienced similar betrayals reached out with encouragement, while colleagues and friends rallied to her side. Slowly, the narrative began to shift, not that it erased the pain, but it reminded her that there was still goodness in the world. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at the court, Sadia returned home and sat on the balcony, looking at the city lights below. Imran joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "Despite everything, you're standing tall. Most people would have crumbled by now." Sadia smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel remarkable. It feels exhausting. I thought family was supposed to protect me. But instead, they broke me. And yet, here you are," Imran replied. "You're fighting back. You're rebuilding. That's strength, Sadia. That's courage." Her heart swelled at his words. For so long, she had felt powerless, but this was her reclaiming life on her own terms. The legal battle continued for months. Each court appearance brought new tension, but also small victories. Evidence was presented, witnesses were called, and the truth about her family's calculated betrayal began to emerge. People who had doubted her sincerity or judgment could no longer ignore the facts. Sadia's courage became her armor. Adil's smug confidence began to falter. The once charming brother, who had manipulated her trust for so long, now faced the glaring reality of consequences. He realized too late that Sadia had grown beyond the sister he had exploited. The confrontation in court was dramatic. Adil's lies crumbled under scrutiny, and Maywish's evasions were exposed. Sadia remained composed throughout, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos of their denials. She had learned to hold her ground, to speak her truth without anger, and to let justice speak louder than her words. Outside the courtroom, her story began to inspire others. Women, especially, reached out to her, sharing their own experiences of familial betrayal, of trust broken and hearts shattered. Sadia found solace in helping them, offering guidance and empathy. Her pain, once isolating, became a source of strength and connection. Meanwhile, Imran's support never wavered. He celebrated each small victory with her, reassured her during moments of doubt, and reminded her that she was worthy of love and respect. Their bond deepened, not just romantically, but as true partners facing life's challenges together. Sadia also took control of her finances. With careful planning and the guidance of Imran and a financial advisor, she began saving, investing, and building a secure future. Every rupee earned felt like a victory, a reclaiming of independence that her family had tried to strip away. Despite progress, emotional wounds lingered. Nights were hardest when memories of her family's betrayal resurfaced. She thought of her mother's hesitant glances, of Adil's manipulative charm, of Maywish's false innocence. Yet each time, she reminded herself, those she had trusted were not the measure of her worth. Her value was not determined by betrayal, but by how she responded to it. Months passed, and the final court ruling arrived. Adil was held accountable for fraud, required to repay the loans, and legally barred from exploiting her in the future. Maywish, though not as severely punished, was reprimanded and forced to publicly acknowledge her role in the deception. The courtroom felt surreal as Sadia left with Imran by her side. For the first time in over a year, she felt a sense of closure. Not all wounds could be healed, but the scales of justice had begun to balance. Returning home, Sadia reflected on the journey. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. She had faced the people she had once loved most and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. The woman who had been naive and trusting was no more. In her place stood someone resilient, empowered, and ready to embrace life on her own terms. Sadia's story also began to reach a wider audience online. Her writings, once private, were now shared widely, resonating with countless individuals who had experienced similar pain. Messages of support poured in from across the country and even internationally. People admired her courage, her resilience, and her refusal to let betrayal define her. One evening, Sadia sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Imran joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "Do you feel free?" he asked gently. Sadia smiled, a mixture of relief and lingering sadness in her eyes. "I feel stronger. I've learned that trust is precious, that betrayal can hurt deeply, but it doesn't have to destroy me. I've learned to protect myself, to value my own judgment, and to surround myself with those who truly care." Imran nodded. "And you've done it all without losing your heart. That's the real victory, Sadia." Tears welled up, but they were not just tears of sorrow, they were tears of triumph. Sadia had reclaimed her life, piece by piece. She had learned that family is not always who we are born to, but who stands by us when the world turns against us. As night fell, she reflected on the journey. Betrayal had been a cruel teacher, but it had taught her resilience, courage, and self-worth. She had faced the darkest parts of life and emerged into the light, ready to embrace the future with clarity and strength. Sadia's transformation was complete, not because she had forgiven her family, not because all wounds were healed, but because she had taken her power back. She was no longer a victim of betrayal. She was a survivor, a woman who had faced unimaginable pain and had refused to let it define her. And though life would continue to present challenges, Sadia knew one thing for certain. She had learned to trust herself above all else, and that trust would guide her through everything yet to come. Sadia woke to the soft glow of the morning sun streaming through her window. For the first time in months, she felt an unusual sense of calm. The storm of betrayal, lies, and heartbreak that had once consumed her life had quieted, not because the world had changed, but because she had. The legal battles were behind her. Adil had been held accountable, his manipulations exposed, and his ability to harm her financially or emotionally legally restricted. Maywish, too, had been forced to acknowledge her deception, and while neither sibling showed genuine remorse, Sadia no longer depended on their validation. She had grown beyond the need for approval from those who had exploited her trust. Sadia's apartment, once modest and bare, had transformed into a sanctuary. Soft sunlight fell across neatly arranged books, framed photographs, and a small workspace where she wrote. Each object told a story of recovery, an intentional act of creating beauty and stability from the ruins of her past life. She had embraced her writing fully. What had begun as a personal journal had evolved into a blog that resonated with thousands. Her stories of betrayal, survival, and resilience touched hearts far beyond her city, receiving messages from women and men who had faced similar heartbreaks. Some shared their gratitude, others shared their pain, but all found solace in her courage. For Sadia, this was more than storytelling, it was reclaiming her voice, her power, and her identity. Imran had become her anchor. Their relationship, forged in love but tested in adversity, had strengthened. Unlike her family, he had never wavered in his loyalty, and he never sought to control or manipulate her. He celebrated her independence, encouraged her ambitions, and supported her unconditionally. Together, they had built a life defined by mutual respect, understanding, and shared dreams. One evening, as they walked along the quiet streets near her apartment, Imran reached for her hand. "You've come so far." "Sadia," he said softly. "I know the past still hurts, but look at you now. Stronger, wiser, unstoppable." Sadia smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. "It's been a journey. I've faced the darkest parts of my life, and I've survived. Not because I'm invincible, but because I refuse to give up on myself." Their walks became a routine of reflection and dreaming. Sadia often shared her ideas for the future, a small publishing venture for women's voices, mentorship programs for survivors of betrayal, and even plans to write a book chronicling her own experiences. Each plan was a step toward reclaiming control over her life, ensuring that the lessons she had learned were not wasted. While her professional and personal life flourished, Sadia still grappled with lingering emotional scars. Memories of her family's betrayal occasionally surfaced, bringing pangs of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. But she had learned to process these emotions rather than be consumed by them. Meditation, writing, and open conversations with Imran allowed her to confront the past without letting it define her future. One particularly difficult day, Sadia received a call from her mother. The voice on the other end trembled. "Sadia, I know I failed you," her mother admitted, a rare moment of honesty breaking through years of silence. "I should have seen what Adil and Maywish were doing. I should have protected you. I'm sorry." Sadia paused, emotions swirling inside her. She felt the old pain rising, but she also felt a sense of control she had never known before. "Mom," she said finally, "I can't change the past. I can't undo what happened. But I've learned something important. I don't need anyone to validate my worth. I've survived. I've grown. And I've learned to trust myself." Her mother's sobs echoed through the phone, but Sadia stayed calm. She realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving their betrayal, it was about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. She ended the call with a quiet resolve, knowing that she could maintain boundaries while preserving her own peace. Financial independence became a cornerstone of Sadia's new life. With careful planning, she invested her earnings, started a small boutique of her own, and hired a team she trusted implicitly. Every decision she made was informed by experience, ensuring that no one could exploit her generosity again. She had learned to be discerning, to value herself, and to demand respect in every interaction. Sadia also reconnected with friends she had lost contact with during her darkest days. She realized that true relationships are based on trust, mutual respect, and support, not convenience or manipulation. These friendships became a source of joy, laughter, and emotional sustenance, reminding her that life could be fulfilling and beautiful despite past heartbreak. Her writing continued to reach audiences far and wide. One day, Sadia received an invitation to speak at a women's empowerment seminar. Standing on stage, facing hundreds of attentive faces, she felt a surge of pride. "I know what it feels like to be betrayed by those you love most," she began, her voice steady and strong. "I know what it feels like to have your trust exploited, your dreams stolen, and your heart broken. But I also know this: betrayal does not define you. Survival does. Courage does. And reclaiming your life on your own terms does." The applause that followed was overwhelming. Sadia realized that her pain, once isolating and debilitating, had transformed into a source of empowerment, not just for herself, but for countless others who needed hope. Her relationship with Imran blossomed alongside her personal growth. They planned a small, intimate wedding, one that celebrated love, trust, and partnership rather than social expectation or material display. Surrounded by true friends, supporters, and allies, Sadia felt the fulfillment of a dream that her family had tried to tarnish. This time, she had chosen every element, every guest, every detail. It was a testament to her resilience, her independence, and her refusal to be defined by past betrayal. Even as life flourished, Sadia never forgot the lessons she had learned. She maintained boundaries with her family, limiting interactions and protecting herself from further harm. She understood that love alone could not heal all wounds. Sometimes distance, caution, and self-preservation were the greatest acts of strength. Sadia's story eventually inspired others to confront their own challenges. Her blog, books, and speeches became resources for survivors of betrayal, abuse, and manipulation. She became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating that even the deepest wounds could be transformed into power, purpose, and self-respect. One quiet evening, sitting on her balcony with Imran by her side, Sadia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of betrayal had been excruciating, the humiliation nearly unbearable, and the loneliness suffocating. Yet through it all, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-aware than ever before. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered, leaning her head on Imran's shoulder. "The woman I was, she would have never survived all of this." "And yet you did," Imran replied softly. "Not just survived, but thrived. You turned heartbreak into strength, betrayal into wisdom, and loss into a life you can be proud of." Sadia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of triumph. She had learned that life could be cruel, that people could betray, and that trust could be broken. But she had also learned that survival, courage, and self-respect could rebuild a life far stronger than before. As night fell over the city, Sadia felt an unprecedented sense of peace. The past no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her life, her identity, and her dignity. She had learned the painful, powerful truth: family is not always defined by blood, but by the choices they make. And self-worth is not defined by betrayal, but by resilience. Sadia had trusted, been betrayed, and yet she had risen from the ashes. She had turned heartbreak into empowerment, pain into purpose, and loss into the foundation of a life she now owned entirely. Her journey had ended not with revenge or sorrow, but with strength, independence, and an unwavering belief in herself. And in that belief, Sadia finally understood the greatest lesson of all: no one can destroy your life unless you allow them to. But with courage, resilience, and self-love, you can rise always, no matter what.